Now we're taking you live to Melbourne, where federal opposition leader Peter Dutton is speaking.
That Paul Keating talks about in terms of Aukus essentially driving a bit of a fracture between the left and the right.
Well, there's clearly division within the Labor Party. There's no question about that. There is on nuclear waste, on that element of the Aukus deal. That undercurrent has always been there. The hard left of the Labor Party, which Mr Albanese led for years and years, they have a real hesitation, a real doubt, and no doubt that's being expressed by Paul Keating. There are, of course, people, including Jim Chalmers and Richard Marles himself, who make great claim to the relationship, the mentoring relationship that they have with Paul Keating. They obviously meet with him regularly. If Paul Keating's prepared to say this in public, what is he saying to senior Labor members in private? And I think it's incumbent upon Richard Marles and others to come out today to rebuke the unhinged comments of Mr Keating, because they should be taking the advice of the military and the intelligence chiefs as opposed to Paul Keating.
Are you entirely behind this Aukus deal now?
We
as
are.
It's announced?
We are, and we want to see the achievement of the nuclear submarine capability. The propulsion system on those submarines is first class, and it will give us the best submarine in class in time. We need to achieve it as quickly as possible, and we need to achieve that capability at the lowest possible cost. So there'll be lots of questions, I think reasonably, that Australians will have to ask Labor over the coming months in the run-up to the budget. Beyond that, how is it all going to be paid for? Labor always taxes and spends, and Labor always mismanages the economy and the budget, and that's why people are paying more in their bills now. If you're seeing an increase in your electricity bill, it's because of the policies that Labor has in place. If you're seeing an increase in your interest rates higher than what they otherwise need to be, it's because Labor's policies have been fuelling inflation, which feeds into higher interest rates. If you have a look at all sorts of bills that you pay when you go to, doesn't matter whether it's the cafe, doesn't matter whether it's a local restaurant, doesn't matter whether it's a local IGA, all of those input costs under Labor are going up. And this is what happens when you get a Labor government. They mismanage the economy, they pull the wrong levers, and families and small businesses end up paying the price. And there is a big price to pay when there is a Labor government. It's very similar to what happened in the 1980s. It's very similar to what happened with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and it's history repeating itself. And people, when we get a change of government and Labor is elected, people get that you change the country. As Paul Keating once said, and he's exactly right, and under Mr Albanese, you're paying more for every item in your grocery basket, you're paying more for your electricity, and certainly more than you need to, and that's a real problem.
Can I just clarify your comments in terms of the NDIS and changes to that to pay for Aukus? Do you believe that there should be changes to the NDIS to pay for this $100 billion, $200 billion spend?
A couple of points. I mean, firstly, I see some reporting of quotes that I made yesterday in relation to aged care. My argument yesterday was that more money needs to be spent in aged care. And if there is a structural change that requires legislation to make our aged care system more sustainable, getting more money into the system to give people greater dignity as they age, then we would support that. Somehow that's been misconstrued by a couple of journalists. I don't quite understand how they drew that conclusion, but there's no quote of mine which suggests that there should be a cut in aged care, and my judgment is quite the opposite. In relation to the NDIS is a critically important system for the dignity of people with disabilities, and we need to make sure that it's a sustainable system. Bill Shorten's spoken about lots of money that's being misspent within the NDIS. I don't want to see that. I want to see the money spent on people who are most in need, those with the most profound disabilities, and to have a system which is sustainable. My argument is that if there is waste, and the Labor Party's arguing that there are waste elements to different programs, then it's a responsibility of any government, of any treasurer, to make sure that taxpayers' money is being spent efficiently and helping those families who are most in need, stopping rorts where they happen across every government program, and by doing that, they can provide support to the money that they're spending in defence. The final point is that the last thing that we should allow Labor to do is to cannibalise the Australian Defence Force like they did when they were last in government. Don't forget, in the 2012-13 budget, so only a decade ago, Labor decided to cut defence spending in real terms by 10.5%. It reduced the spending back to 1.56% of GDP, which was the lowest level since 1938. Now, when we were in government, we restored integrity to the defence budget. men and women in uniform recognise that and stop me constantly to say thank you for it. There were families, defence families, who lost their jobs and missed out on opportunities when Labor was last in government. And we need to fund Aukus, but we don't need to cannibalise defence to do it. And the government needs to be upfront about how they're going to pay for the Aukus commitment. It's essential that we get that capability, and we're strongly supporting the government in that regard. But the government needs to answer questions about how it is they're going to pay for it. And I don't want to see money ripped out of Army or Air Force or Navy to pay for the Aukus deal. Again, if there are problems in programs or money's not being spent appropriately, if that's the government's claim, then make that public. But if you're just going into defence, taking billions of dollars away from the men and women in uniform to try and fund the Aukus program and do as the Treasurer says, that this is just going to be a cost-neutral program, nobody believes that. It's not credible. And the Labor Party will have to detail that in the budget in May.
Just on Aston, Chris Bowen on Friday here in Aston said that if you lose any of the margin that you've got here in Aston, it's a major failure of your leadership. What do you say to that?
Well, Chris Bowen said at the last election, if you didn't support their policies, don't vote for them. And if you don't support a policy to jack your power prices up by 31%, then don't vote for Labor. I would follow Chris Bowen's words in terms of what he said before the election. Don't vote Labor if you don't like their policies. And their policies at the moment are really hitting families and hitting small businesses. When you look at what Chris Bowen's just announced, even today, forget about what he said.
Well, that was Peter Dutton speaking live, campaigning in Aston in Victoria for the by-election there.